Before this story disappears beneath the surface, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and stay close, because once you enter Camp 009, there is no easy way out. The alarms were already screaming when the divers surfaced. Red strobes cut through the dense fog rolling across the North Atlantic. Their reflections shattered against the black water, which looked deeper and colder than it should have. A rigid inflatable boat slammed against the side of a grey naval platform as men in dry suits hauled something heavy and awkward from the sea. At first glance, it just looked like debris, a mess of twisted metal and torn cables. But then a human hand broke the surface. It was pale and swollen, its fingers frozen into a final, desperate claw. The body had risen from directly beneath Platform 9. Officially, Platform 9 didn't exist. It was a ghost on the charts, a phantom coordinate. Within minutes, the airspace above was sealed. Helicopters hovered low, their powerful rotors beating the mist into a frantic, swirling storm. No press. No satellites. No explanations. Total lockdown. Because what the divers had pulled from the ocean floor wasn't just a corpse, it was a breach. And breaches were the one thing Camp 009 was designed to prevent, at all costs. 3 hours later, in a sterile, sealed briefing room in Brussels, a single photograph was placed on the table. It showed the dead man's face. His eyes were half open, his skin bleached white by salt and immense pressure. His jaw bore a thin, surgically precise scar, a marker that only one institution in the world could have made. Camp 009. The room fell utterly silent. Everyone there, the most powerful people you've never heard of, understood the terrifying implication. Camp 009 was not a myth. It wasn't a rumor whispered in the dark corners of the internet. It was real, it was operational, and it was supposed to be impossible to escape, alive or dead. The man in the photo was supposed to still be inside. How did this place come to be? Camp 009 was conceived in panic. After a decade of coordinated terror plots, cyber criminals vanishing through legal loopholes, and cartel financiers buying their freedom with influence, Western intelligence agencies made a decision they would never, ever publicly admit. They concluded that some threats were simply too dangerous for courts, too influential for prisons, and far too valuable to just eliminate. So they buried them. Not underground, but underwater. Anchored to the continental shelf, Camp 009 sits nearly 300 meters below the surface. It's a reinforced steel complex, a brutalist maze tethered to a network of submerged platforms disguised as innocent research stations and weather arrays. Inside, there are no windows. There is no horizon. Just the crushing pressure of the deep, unending darkness and concrete corridors lit by artificial day and night cycles, specifically designed to break the human sense of time. Inmates arrive hooded and sedated, transferred through pressurized submersibles that never log their routes. Their official records are scrubbed clean. They are listed as deceased, missing, or extradited to countries that don't ask questions. Camp 009 is where the world sends the people it cannot afford to let speak ever again, which is precisely why the body in the photograph terrified everyone in that room. The victim was identified as Elias Crone, a former maritime engineer turned black market logistics mastermind. Crone was a genius who had built untraceable smuggling routes for arms dealers and human traffickers, using deep-sea infrastructure and private research vessels as his cover. When he was finally captured 18 months earlier, intelligence analysts celebrated quietly. Crone knew too much about ports, about undersea cables, about offshore black sites. He even knew about the existence of Camp 009 itself, which is why he was sent there. He was a living skeleton in their closet, and now, that skeleton had just floated to the surface. This wasn't just a security failure. It was an impossibility. Nobody leaves Camp 009. The complex is designed to be the final word. It's a tomb you enter while you're still breathing. His body washing up on the surface wasn't just a random event. It was a declaration. Someone, either inside or out, had just announced that the world's most secure black site was compromised. The game had changed. The silence had been broken. And for the secret keepers in that room in Brussels, the nightmare was just beginning. The question wasn't just how Crone got out, but who helped him, and what else was about to come crawling out of the dark. His death raised only one question that mattered. How did a man locked inside the most secure prison on Earth end up floating free? The investigation was handed to a joint task force that didn't officially exist, led by Special Investigator Mara Kincaid. Kincaid was known for one thing: she didn't accept institutional answers. If a system failed, she assumed someone inside it wanted it to fail. Her first demand was simple: full access. She was denied. Instead, she was given a sanitized briefing, diagrams missing entire sections, personnel lists with redacted names, and a timeline that ended exactly 12 hours before Crone's estimated time of death. Camp 009, according to her handlers, had experienced no irregularities. Kincaid stared at the diagrams, her finger tracing the outer ring of the facility. Pressure doors, flood locks, emergency purge systems. Every single path out led through layers of steel designed to crush anything inside if breached. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that a man drowned outside a prison he cannot physically leave, and nothing went wrong?" No one answered. So she did what she always did. She followed the details others hoped she'd ignore. The autopsy report revealed something unsettling. Crone's lungs contained seawater, yes, but also trace amounts of industrial lubricant used only in submersible docking clamps. His wrists bore faint circular marks, consistent with magnetic restraints. And embedded in the fabric of his prison-issued jumpsuit was a sliver of polymer fiber not used anywhere in Camp 009's construction. It came from the surface. Kincaid pushed deeper. She requested the maintenance logs. One engineer, a quiet systems technician named Thomas Hale, stood out immediately. Hale had signed off on 3 routine inspections in the week leading up to Crone's death, inspections that should have required a full crew but were marked as solo. When questioned, Hale insisted nothing unusual had occurred. His voice didn't shake. His hands didn't tremble. But his security badge told a different story. It had been used at a restricted docking port at 2:17 a.m., 6 hours before the alarms went off. That docking port led to only one place: the transfer chamber. According to protocol, the chamber was used solely for intake, not release. Once an inmate entered Camp 009, there was no authorized mechanism for them to leave. Not alive. Kincaid requested the chamber's internal footage. She was told it had been corrupted. That was when she realized the truth was already being buried, just like the prison itself. Someone inside Camp 009 hadn't just failed. They had acted. As she prepared to escalate the investigation beyond her handlers, a final report landed in her encrypted inbox. It was flagged urgent, Priority 1. The subject line read, "Recovered data, docking port 3. The attached still image showed a grainy frame from a camera feed thought to be destroyed. In it, Crone stood upright, unhooded, alive, flanked not by guards, but by a man in civilian clothes wearing an access badge with clearance higher than any warden. A badge that belonged to Thomas Hale. But the most disturbing detail was the timestamp. The footage was recorded after Crone was officially logged as secured in his cell, which meant only one thing. Camp 009 hadn't suffered an escape. It had authorized a release. And whatever Crone was taken out to do hadn't ended with his death. His death was just the beginning. The message. The question now wasn't how he got out. It was who let him out, and why they wanted everyone to believe he was dead. Kincaid closed the file. The real investigation had just begun. If you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe for more. The truth didn't surface all at once. It leaked, drop by drop, like poison from a cracked vial. Within hours of the recovered image circulating through restricted channels, 2 things happened simultaneously. First, Thomas Hale, a supposedly low-level technician, vanished without a trace. Second, every digital door around Camp 009 began to slam shut. Mara Kincaid was on a military transport, headed for a routine debrief, when her secure tablet went dark, mid-scroll. No error message. No shutdown notice. Just a black screen staring back at her like an accusation. She knew what it meant. Someone, somewhere, had decided she was no longer an asset. She was now part of the problem. She waited for the aircraft to hit a patch of turbulence, then unbuckled and made her way to the pilot's compartment. One flash of her credentials was all it took. 10 minutes later, the flight path changed, unofficially, of course. They were diverting to a refueling base in Iceland, one of the last places still outside the immediate, crushing reach of the task force trying to contain this mess. By the time her boots hit the frozen tarmac, Kincaid was operating on pure instinct. She contacted the one person she trusted in the sprawling intelligence ecosystem, Jonah Reed. A former signals analyst turned whistleblower, Reed now survived by knowing where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically and sometimes literally. She sent him Hale's name and the still image. His response came back in under a minute. Not just a technician. Hale is a logistics ghost. Black clearances. Off-books contracts. He doesn't fix systems. He moves people. That single sentence shifted the entire case on its axis. If Hale was a mover, then the notorious Elias Crone hadn't escaped Camp 009 by force or by accident. He had been extracted. Professionally. This raised a much more dangerous question. Why bring him out at all? Why free a man so dangerous he was kept in a prison buried miles beneath the ocean? The beginning of an answer started to form when Kincaid pulled up an old, archived dossier under Crone's name. Buried deep inside, under layers of redactions, was a reference to something called Project Undertow. No description. No author. Just a list of coordinates scattered across the Atlantic and Mediterranean, all located near major undersea data cables. Crone hadn't just smuggled weapons and people. He had mapped the nervous system of the modern world. And now, he was free. Meanwhile, far below the surface, Camp 009 was unraveling in silence. Warden Alastair Voss walked the central corridor, its curved walls humming softly under the immense pressure of the deep sea. He had spent 14 years underground, long enough for the facility to feel less like a prison and more like a living organism. Today, it felt sick. Cells were being audited. Staff were being questioned. Protocols were being rewritten on the fly. But the inmates, they noticed the shift immediately. When a place built on rigid routine suddenly changes its rhythm, it sends a signal stronger than any official announcement. In Cell Block C, a former arms broker named Lucien Marek sat perfectly still on his bunk, eyes closed. Marek had once sold surface-to-air missiles to 3 different sides of the same conflict. He also happened to be Elias Crone's former partner. As guards passed his cell, Marek opened his eyes and smiled. He knew. Above them all, in the control ring overlooking the entire facility, technicians whispered about phantom pings, unauthorized, ghostly data bursts detected near the facility's external sensors. They were nothing large enough to trigger the alarms. Just small, fleeting signals. Just enough to suggest that someone, or something, was out there in the dark. Knocking. Or maybe, listening. And waiting. This is just the beginning of the story. If you want to find out what happens next to Mara Kincaid and what Project Undertow truly is, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next chapter. Thanks for watching. Back on the surface, Kincaid found her first real break in Reykjavik's industrial harbour. Using her partner Reed's contacts, she tracked down a private research vessel. This ship had gone completely dark for 6 hours the same night the inmate, Elias Crone, supposedly died. Officially, its mission was seabed sampling. But that was just a cover. Its true owner was traced back through 3 different shell companies, leading to a defense contractor. And this contractor had ties to the construction of Camp 009 itself, the deep-sea prison. Something was definitely wrong here. Kincaid knew she had to get on that ship. Under the guise of a routine port inspection, she boarded the vessel. Below deck, in the cargo hold, she found exactly what she was looking for, a modular holding compartment. It had been cleaned in a hurry, but you could still smell the faint, sharp scent of antiseptic mixed with salt water. Magnetic restraint anchors lined the walls. There was no doubt about it. Elias Crone had been held here. But then, something else caught her eye. Scratched into the metal panel near the floor, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, was a sequence of numbers and letters. It wasn't coordinates. It wasn't any code she immediately recognized. She took a picture and sent it to Reed. A few minutes later, he messaged her back, his words sending a chill down her spine. Those markings? They matched the service codes for Undertow nodes. Undertow, the global network of undersea data cables. Crone hadn't left those marks by accident. He was sending a signal. But who was he signaling to? The answer came much faster and with more force than she could have ever expected. That very night, a synchronized disruption rippled across Europe. Internet traffic slowed to a crawl. Financial transactions stalled. Emergency services in 3 major coastal cities experienced brief but terrifying blackouts. Official statements blamed temporary infrastructure issues. But behind the scenes, unofficially, panic was spreading through secure government channels. Someone was testing their access to the world's most critical data infrastructure, the undersea cables. And Elias Crone was the only person alive who knew how to do it without being detected. Kincaid finally understood the true scale of the betrayal. Camp 009 wasn't just a prison. It was leverage, a collection of the world's most dangerous minds, held in reserve. And someone had just decided to take one of its inmates and turn him into a weapon. As global authorities scrambled to contain the disruptions, another message arrived. This one wasn't encrypted. It was broadcast for the world to see. A short video clip surfaced on a fringe platform. It was only online for a few minutes before being scrubbed, but that was long enough for it to be archived and spread. The footage showed Elias Crone. He was alive. Gaunt, pale, but alive. He was standing in a dimly lit room, and he looked directly into the camera. His voice was calm, but carried a terrifying weight. "They told me I was erased," he said. "But erasing a man who knows where the entire world is buried is impossible." Behind him, a digital map flickered to life, highlighting glowing lines that crisscrossed the globe beneath the oceans. The video cut to black. The message was clear. Hours later, deep within the crushing pressure of the Atlantic, Warden Voss received an emergency alert from inside Camp 009. One of the internal pressure seals, located near the main transfer chamber, had been manually overridden. But it wasn't an inmate's doing. It was a staff clearance code, a code that outranked his own. As alarms began to blare and echo through the claustrophobic corridors of the facility, Voss realized the unthinkable had happened. Camp 009 wasn't just compromised. It was being prepared for another release. The game had just changed, and the world was now the hostage. 4:12 in the morning, UTC. Deep beneath the Atlantic, pressure alarms screamed through Camp 009. Transfer Chamber 2 cycles opened for the first time since the prison was built. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, plunging entire wings into darkness. Warden Alistair Voss runs. For 14 years, he's been trained to treat every anomaly as a system error. But this is different. This is deliberate. Whoever is doing this knows the prison's architecture, its fail-safes, its deepest secrets. They aren't just breaking the prison. They're using it. By the time Voss reaches the control ring, 3 inmates are gone. Not dead. Not missing. Released. Their paperwork signed off by an authority code marked Omega Black. Only 5 people on Earth have that clearance. 2 are dead. 1 is retired. Another is in Washington, demanding answers. The 5th has no official identity at all. Watching from the shadows, Mara Kincaid intercepts the chaos. Emergency briefs, scrambled comms, Navy suddenly on high alert. She doesn't need confirmation. Camp 009 is bleeding its most dangerous assets into the world, and someone high up believes the damage can be contained. They are dead wrong. A fragmented message arrives from her old contact, Jonah Reed. "I found Undertow," it reads. Not a project. A contingency. Attached is a memo from a long-dissolved Security Council. The language is cold, precise, and terrifyingly logical. Camp 009 was never just a prison. It was a vault. In the event of global collapse, the world's most dangerous minds, hackers, smugglers, engineers of chaos, could be selectively redeployed. Monsters, kept on a very short leash. Elias Crone, the first to escape, hadn't broken out. He'd been activated. And now, others were following. Kincaid tracks Crone to the Azores Plateau, a blind spot in the middle of the Atlantic, dense with data cables. A joint task force moves in fast, but they're already outplayed. The confrontation happens on a submersible support vessel, its deck slick with salt and oil. Crone doesn't run. He just smiles, a bitter, exhausted smile. "You should have left me buried," he tells Kincaid as armed teams surround them. But they couldn't, because when the world starts to choke, it needs people like me. She demands to know who authorized it, who opened the doors. He leans in. "It wasn't one person," he whispers. "It was a vote." Before she can react, the ship's lights die. And across the globe, it begins. Stock exchanges freeze. Emergency frequencies flood with static. Satellites go dark. Entire regions fall into a synchronized, eerie silence. Project Undertow is live. Officially, Crone dies during the raid. No body recovered. Within 48 hours, the crisis is declared neutralized. Systems are restored. Camp 009 is quietly decommissioned. The world breathes a sigh of relief. 3 weeks later, Mara Kincaid resigns. Her final report is sealed, restricted indefinitely. She knows the truth will never surface, not without bringing down the very institutions meant to protect us. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months later, a fishing trawler off the coast of Portugal pulls something from the deep. A data relay node, modified with components from Camp 009. The authorities dismiss it as scrap. But Kincaid knows better. It's not prison hardware. It's new infrastructure. Proof that Camp 009 wasn't destroyed. It was repurposed. Somewhere beneath the ocean, the systems are still running. Not as a prison, but as a vault, ready to be opened again when the powers that be decide it's convenient. The world sleeps, thinking the nightmare is over. But nightmares don't end. They submerge. They wait. And when the pressure is right, they rise again. If this story pulled you under, make sure you subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper.